For more on this, I spoke to Saleem Ali. He's the professor of energy and environment at the University of Delaware and also author of Earthly Order: How Natural Laws Define Human Life. And he begins by talking about the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and the incentives for solar power.
Those subsidies will definitely inject much needed incentives for the industry to be able to weather storms economically. So I think it's going to be very significant to ignite the industry.
Okay, now, in fairness, we have had incentives, at least for the consumers in the U.S., whether it's to offset installations or it's to provide subsidies, or quite frankly, for some people, it's literally paying them for excess power they might generate at their home or businesses. Did these incentives in the past, did they work?
Well, those were more on the consumer side. You know, the Inflation Reduction Act is also focused more on the manufacturing side. And as your commentator was earlier saying, that there's going to be much more injection into manufacturing. So a lot of the solar panel installation incentives have been at the state and local level. And yes, there have been some federal incentives too, but most of the major ones have been state and local. And so that's going to be the big differences. Now we're going to have much more on the manufacturing side as well.
Right, which the United States trails badly behind. I looked at the top 10 list of manufacturers, corporate manufacturers that is, and 8 out of 10 I believe are from China, one was from Canada, and there's a lone 1 out of the top 10 from the US. And this is an industry that we in general in the US have said we have to support, and over the past 2 decades or so, I feel like somehow something has gone wrong, and I get it, the Biden administration might be trying to offset that today, but what is the incentive other than purely subsidizing factories?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the unfortunate part of the story, is that just last year we did have John Kerry and Anthony Blinken commenting that despite the other differences with China, climate change was an area where they could cooperate. But the cooperation has been much more limited to trying to get China to assist with climate mitigation in developing countries, rather than looking at the systems-wide planetary approach and recognizing that China already has such a head start with the manufacturing that it would make sense efficiently, if we're really concerned about climate change in terms of the timeline, we catch up with our domestic manufacturing at that level. And so it would make sense to cooperate on energy infrastructure. And that's what I would hope eventually comes about. And I think American industry is going to probably motivate that, because they recognize those limitations. And then hopefully we can have more climate diplomacy, energy diplomacy, whatever you may want to call it, because that's the reality, that, as you have noted, the dominance of China in both solar and wind is extraordinary in terms of the manufacturing side. On the wind side, Europeans have also caught up quite a bit, but the solar side, definitely China dominates. And not only that, a lot of the raw materials which are needed for this infrastructure, China has most of those too. And so that's the other area the Biden administration is trying to diversify material supply, and which is a good thing. I mean, we should be diversifying material supply across the planet, but it needs to be done through efficient. Where are the resources and where can we process them best?
If you were to choose between wind and solar, and if I could pull up a chart, it would show the cost of per megawatt from 10 years ago to where it is today, and I think they're both extremely competitive today than they were during that time. Why aren't we making more investments, for example, in the competitors of solar? In your case, you called it wind.
Well, I mean, a lot of it is cost related. It's for the same reason that China became a manufacturing hub for so much of other products. And so in the US, the cost factor has played a role. Now, that may change with these subsidies and other mechanisms. And to be fair, I mean, China has also had, various protectionist policies and so on, which have favored Chinese industry and allowed it to flourish. So it's the U.S. is trying to also now catch up. I think they are just a bit too late to the game if they really want to make the difference within the climate mitigation timeline. The issue is if we're really concerned about climate change and the timeline, we cannot catch up in that time frame, much as we may want to.
We got to move faster. Next up on Global